Washington, D.C.
Okay, there you have it. The press being escorted out of the cabinet room after a whirlwind conversation with President Trump and Prime Minister Viktor Orban. We didn't know until right before that began if press would be allowed in the room. And I don't know if I should use the word devolved, but into a back and forth that required the press secretary to come in. The president called Caroline Leavitt from another room in the White House to chastise reporters for suggesting that the president was not acknowledging affordability. This is something we've talked about a lot this week, of course, coming off the election results on Tuesday. And we're going to talk about it quite a bit more here as well, including geopolitics. He's there to talk about the war in Ukraine and, of course, energy trade with Viktor Orban, which we're going to be discussing in just a moment with former ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. Thanks for joining us. If you're just getting into the cycle here on Balance of Power, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington alongside Tyler Kendall as we bring you politics from the nation's capital and connect the dots with what's happening today on Wall Street. Tyler, pretty remarkable visit there. The old saying about politics stopping at the water's edge might need to be updated. To hear the Prime Minister of Hungary sit in the cabinet room at the White House and denigrate the former president, the former administration, was pretty remarkable.
Right, and we know that these two leaders have a very warm relationship. I don't even think we have to say relatively warm. We know that they have been two allies, that the Hungarian prime minister did support President Trump when he was then candidate Trump, and it didn't seem like his reelection was going to happen. So these two have history here. And of course, the pivotal part of this meeting is that Hungary is trying to use that relationship and get an exemption when it comes to these Russian sanctions and to these U.S. sanctions on Russian oil. Hungary, of course, a major importer. About 90% of their crude imports come from Moscow.
I mentioned William Taylor, just the voice that we want for a day like this. Former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine with us live on Bloomberg TV and radio. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for joining us. Some of the language that we heard in the room today was striking. The president saying, I stick up for Viktor Orban. Not a lot of people do because in many ways they are jealous. Viktor Orban speaking to the previous administration saying after your leaving president, everything was basically broke, ruined, and canceled. How important is this relationship for the United States' reputation abroad?
Well, it's the right question, Joe. Viktor Orban is the outlier in Europe. He supports, by and large, President Putin, and has been not shy about seeking approval of and friendship with and cooperation with President Putin, who is, as you pointed out over and over, invading and has invaded for 3.5 years Ukraine. So President Trump does have some leverage there with Prime Minister Orban to make it clear that Orban should not be buying that Russian oil. And so we will see the answer to your question after they've had this meeting as to whether or not Orban can get exemptions from the sanctions that President Trump has put on Russian oil.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because we have reporting that Hungary's prime minister is going to float some energy deals to the president when it comes to importing more U.S. LNG, when it comes to putting up nuclear reactors. What does the diplomatic effort look like to wean Hungary off of Russian energy imports? What has to be done for a solution down the road to take place so that they're no longer bringing in those barrels from Moscow?
Well, Tyler, we know that that's possible. The rest of Europe has done that at great expense. I mean, this is not easy to go down from relying on Russian oil to almost weaned, as you say, from Russian oil. So it can be done. The Hungarians do get a lot of oil from pipelines from Russia. But there's another pipeline that doesn't come from Russia that they can use. So it is possible. It is possible, and it'll take will. It'll take a decision by the Hungarians to cut themselves off from that oil, and President Trump has the leverage to get them to do that.
Mr. Ambassador, what was France thinking? What was Germany thinking? What was the UK thinking watching this conversation?
They were all a little embarrassed, I imagine, that one of theirs, that is one of the EU members, indeed a NATO member, is apparently sticking up for the aggression that the Russians have inflicted on Ukraine. So the rest of Europe is almost unanimous in its determination to wean itself from Russian energy, and has done that amazingly successful. Orban is one of two exceptions to that. And so these other nations are hoping that President Trump will use the leverage that he has over Prime Minister Orban to force him to make the hard decisions. And then, yes, these other energy deals between Hungary and the United States can take place. But they should take place after Hungary weans itself from Russian oil.
We have data that shows that the average of Russia's crude exports for the 4 weeks ending on November 2nd, so essentially the last month or so, slumped by the most since January of 2024. So it would appear that these sanctions are causing a squeeze when it comes to Russian energy exports. But how should we really be quantifying progress when it comes to a potential solution to end the ongoing war? Are statistics like that enough when you hear President Trump saying it seems like there could be an end in the, quote, not so distant future, but we really haven't gotten any indications that there's been progress on the negotiations front?
And there probably won't be, Tyler, on negotiations front. What there could be, though, is what you've indicated, that is the pressure on Putin, the reduction of the revenues that he gets from selling oil and gas, some to Hungary, but more to India and China. When that pressure results in an understanding by Putin that he's going to lose this war. But you're also right, it's not just the economic pressure. It's going to, in addition to that economic pressure, which is important, and as you say, is already having an effect, reducing those revenues. But in addition to that, Putin has to understand that the Americans and the Europeans are going to continue to provide the Ukrainians with the weapons and the finance to allow them to keep going longer than he can, longer than Putin can. Putin is going to realize, once that happens, that the Americans and Europeans are going to provide Ukraine with the weapons and the finance to enable them to outlast him. At that point, Putin stops the war.
We asked the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. specifically about Tomahawk cruise missiles when she joined us last evening. Ambassador Ola Stefanishnya told us, knowing that the DOD had approved this and the president is considering the deployment of Tomahawk cruise missiles, that they were actually in talks. There might be some progress here. Here's what she told us.
The discussion is still ongoing, but we have a lot of delegations working here, including Ukraine, to scale up the available financial resources to procure more military capabilities from U.S. And it's not only Tomahawks, different types of other long-range and short-range missiles. This dialogue is ongoing, and I can only say that it's rather positive.
Positive. Negotiations ongoing. That made news, and it was picked up by a lot of news organizations, Ambassador, because the White House had told us that there were no talks underway. Do you think Ukraine will get Tomahawk missiles?
I think they will. I think sooner or later will. As you just indicated, the Pentagon says we got plenty. We got plenty of Tomahawks. We've been making Tomahawks since the late 70s and deployed them since the 80s. And so there are thousands around. And so that can be, and that's what the Pentagon said. The Pentagon said, you don't have to worry about stockpiles, because other people were saying we don't have enough. We have plenty. And this would be a big boon. This would help Ukraine do what President Trump has said he wants to do, which is to stop the war. This is an indication that the Ukrainians would be able to strike deep into Russia to stop the war. So, yes, I think this is eventually coming.
All right. William Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, we thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg Television and Radio today. And to extend the conversation, we want to bring in our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stonecourt Capital and a Bloomberg Politics contributor, alongside another Bloomberg Politics contributor, Jeanne Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, here with us today. Rick, I want to start with you and just get your overview of how we just saw this meeting play out in the cabinet room at the White House, and your thoughts on President Trump and his relatively warm relationship with the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban.
Yeah, Tyler, as has been already discussed, they have a long-term relationship that goes back for quite some time, and not just on a state-to-state basis, very politically simpatico. Viktor Orban has participated in a lot of events hosted by conservative groups in the United States, both here and in his own country. So there is a warm relationship that exists there. Highly criticized by the Democrats, Viktor Orban being seen as much more authoritarian than others in Europe. And of course, we know that Donald Trump doesn't hold that against other world leaders in his dealings. So, yeah, this is a bit of a rally of like-minded individuals. But I must say, I was impressed by the fact that Donald Trump really didn't take the bait on a number of issues related to the Ukraine. Sure, he did his usual song and dance about how the war would have never happened and Biden screwed it up, and echoed by Viktor Orban in an incredible exchange where it defied all sensibilities for a foreign head of state to criticize a former president. I mean, pretty outrageous in the cabinet room of the White House.
Seemed outrageous, Jeannie. It was a Republican, a Republican senator, Arthur Vandenberg, who actually helped to create the United Nations, who coined the phrase politics ends at the water's edge. This is some sort of mirrored version of this, where the foreign actor has crossed the water to come into the White House, to Rick's point, into the cabinet room, to criticize a former president of the United States. He said, after you're leaving president, everything was basically broke, ruined, and canceled. Was this a moment for you, Jeannie?
My, how things have changed. Yes, absolutely it was. It's enough to hear Donald Trump almost daily wanting to talk about Joe Biden and blame his own woes on Joe Biden, but then to have the leader of a foreign nation come over. But of course, Viktor Orban is no regular leader of a foreign nation. He is somebody who was here to visit Mar-a-Lago during the campaign. He was somebody who spoke to CPAC. So he has a political view. He is not shy about sharing that. And I think, to me, what was so striking, in addition to the issues involving Ukraine, was how tone deaf this entire exercise was, given what happened on Tuesday night. For the president to describe affordability, which both polls before the election, the voters Tuesday night, and the exit polls say is the major issue on voters' mind, as a con job. And for him to try to sort of gaslight Americans and to say, well, you're all wrong, things are really good, you just don't know it, right? This is, to me, how tone deaf a president with really good political chops normally has become. And I think Donald Trump needs to stop going abroad, needs to get himself out into the United States, talk to voters who say exactly the opposite, including large percentages of his own voters who crossed the line in New York City, California, Virginia, New Jersey, to vote for a Democrat on the issue of affordability. So to me, this was tone deaf to a degree that it would be very concerning if I was a Republican who was going to be running in 26, facing voters who are angry and a president saying affordability is a con job.
Well, Jeannie, I'm glad that you brought up affordability, because we want to hit on that as well, since it did really prevail in that conversation that we just saw play out in the cabinet room. Of course, a big part of this is how Americans are feeling about the economy and the government. We did just get a redhead on the terminal that the U.S. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says that U.S. flight cuts could reach 20% if the situation worsens. And we haven't seen any indication, Joe, at this point, that we're getting closer to resolving this ongoing government shutdown. Rick, I want to pose this to you. I know that you watch U.S. consumer sentiment really closely. We got the preliminary readings for November today from the University of Michigan, showing that consumer sentiment hit a near record low today amid the government shutdown, amid uncertainty around tariffs. How are you reading how Americans are currently reading this economy, as we see really no end in sight at this point for the government to reopen?
I love Fridays when we can get the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. Tyler, thank you so much. It's the second best poll that is taken in politics. The first best was Tuesday, when voters actually voted, and it mirrors very significantly what we see today in the preliminary estimates for November, and that is a significant decrease, 6.2% on the Consumer Sentiment Index, 30% down from a year ago. Think about it. Donald Trump was elected 1 year ago this week, and the consumer sentiment indexes dropped 30% during that period of time. Now, nobody should then be surprised to see the kind of election outcomes that occurred on Tuesday, and it's all the way across the board. I mean, they're significantly down from a year ago on the future sentiment of people. How's it going to be a year from now? Their current situation down 11% in this one survey. This is one of the lowest levels the Michigan consumer sentiment has hit, compared to even Joe Biden at the height of inflation. This is where people are. So when Donald Trump starts talking about inflation and how horrible it was, he ought to think about like how people are feeling today, because they're in the same position.
We should note that the comments on gas prices didn't completely add up either. We actually took a look around here, and when it comes to gas prices, AAA still has the average above $3 a gallon, and it's only about 10 cents different than it was 1 year ago. So as much as we would all love to be paying $2 a gallon, that didn't seem to actually jive with what we're seeing from AAA and from Gas Buddy. Great panel as always. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, thank you so much for weighing in, and I hope you both have a great weekend here. I also hope you're not flying. We're going to talk about that coming up with Chris Sununu. How about that, Tyler? It could be 20%. Sean Duffy saying as much to Fox News this afternoon when it comes to capacity cuts. They start today at 4%, and people are already feeling the pain. Chris Sununu will join us next, speaking for the airline industry here on Bloomberg. Not looking so hot today on Wall Street with the volatility continuing here, although we have seen worse numbers. And we're keeping our eyes on airline stocks as well. They've been bouncing around a little bit today, not for the better, as we see these capacity cuts take effect. Tyler, it made a red head on the terminal when Sean Duffy said this could reach 20%, but there is no actual plan for that, right? That's depending on how long the government shutdown goes, and some people think it could end in the next week or so. But the fact is, we'll be at a full-on 10% cut by the middle of next week.
Right, exactly. This is phased in for now. It started today with 4% cut. The transportation secretary saying it could go as high as 20%. Of course, this is at 40 airports around the country that we've been watching very closely, not impacting international routes, but if you're flying anywhere domestically, you may get hit with a delay or a cancellation. Now, at one of those airports, we do find our very own Norah Mulinda, who's reporting live all day today on Bloomberg at Newark International Airport. Norah, can you just give us any more context today as we get this announcement from the Transportation Secretary? Cuts could reach up to 20%. What are we seeing right now on the ground?
Well, Tyler, this remains to be a fluid situation. Of course, we have really been hearing a lot about the fact that this government shutdown really weighing on TSA workers, air traffic controllers, especially given the fact that they've been unpaid since October 1st when the shutdown began. When we think about size and scope here, this is a 72nd worst day in terms of airline cancellations here since January 2024. So not a catastrophe here, although there were a lot of fears of this potentially being the case. This is not the worst that we have seen. As we're speaking on the ground to individuals, workers here, they're saying this is not the first government shutdown that they've had to deal with. So we are still hearing a lot of TSA workers here at Newark Liberty Airport actually still reporting to work, coming here, serving consumers, serving the U.S. customer here, despite the fact that they are not receiving a paycheck as of yet.
The 72nd worst day in just a couple of years, Norah, that sounds like any old day. Are you talking to travelers? Are they just getting along with their business?
I mean, some getting along with their business, but also we are speaking to some individuals just truly disgruntled, frustrated. I spoke to a woman earlier, a plastic surgeon, trying to fly from EWR, from Newark Liberty over to Barbados, and actually seeing that her flight was canceled and rescheduled to JFK. And it was an hour earlier, so she, of course, missed that flight as well. So she is frustrated, of course, blaming this on the U.S. government shutdown, but we do know that the majority of the disruption here is for regional and domestic flights here, not necessarily international. But you are seeing a broad-based frustration across the U.S. consumers.
Well, of course, that sounds awful, but I don't think the plastic surgeon not making it to Bermuda is going to get into the president's stump speech here. Norah, thank you. You've been great today. Pull on the short straw to hang out at Newark Airport for an entire day. We have a special voice for you here as we talk about this story. Let's get to the heart of the matter. Norah Mulinda, thank you so much. The former governor of New Hampshire is with us, who is now one of the faces of the airline industry. And a couple of weeks ago, we had a great conversation about this with Chris Sununu, former Republican governor of New Hampshire, now the president of Airlines for America, president and CEO. What a time for you to start this job. Are you sure you want to do this?
I tell you, it's been great.
Yeah.
I love working for the industry in that there's obviously a challenge. It's a challenge on a normal day, but I effectively work for the 9 CEOs of the 9 largest air carriers in America.
And they're crying to reopen the government.
Yeah. Well, they're not trying to reopen the government.
They're crying to reopen.
They're crying.
Yes.
Oh, no, absolutely. And it's everything from being on the phones to talking to folks on Capitol Hill and letting them understand that, what's happening, especially with this new mandate to cut back, rolling up to 10% of flights. That'll hit them alone about $100 million a day, right? And then you look at the broader economic impact, which we estimate to be at least $250 million, if not, close to maybe $500 million a day. When you look at the hotel rooms and all the other things that go with travel, right? So it has a huge economic impact, as you can see from those images right there. These cuts that are being mandated really are going to effect starting today. Roll about 4% till Monday, and then that scales up to 10% by next week. All because not for anything that the airlines have done or anything the American public has done. Unfortunately, these are just the victims of bad politics up on Capitol Hill.
Were the airlines prepared? Was there already a contingency plan in place and set into motion? Because we knew that this government shutdown was coming and that it wasn't looking likely like it was going to end anytime soon.
So the airlines are prepared. They have amazing teams. They know how to adjust. I got to say, if you told me on day 38 that we were dealing with a few delays, as you could see from those, and I think the average TSA line today across the country was like 15 to 20 minutes. Some got up to 30 minutes, so it wasn't that bad. Some as quick as 2 minutes if you're going through pre-check. So both the airlines, I think, were prepared in terms of being able to move folks around. The mandated cancellations is different, right?
Yes.
Having delays, we've seen a lot of delays, but actually very few cancellations up until this point. Now the mandated cancellations being driven for safety, right? There's real data that show that the pressure on the system is going to continue to build. Last weekend was some real tough days. Halloween night was really, really tough. That's going to continue to grow as the call-outs, both on the TSA and the air traffic controller side, increase, and the demand builds as we get closer to Thanksgiving. So I think the FAA is being smart and saying, okay, we're not going to wait for this thing to come to a grinding halt. We're going to ask folks to proactively cancel a certain number of flights. The head of the FAA, Brian Bedford, he's terrific. He's a former CEO of an airline. He totally understands what this impact means. He understands that it isn't just we cancel the flight. Managing crews from point A to point B, knowing that folks could potentially be stranded because their first flight was fine, but the second leg is now canceled. Moving those folks. And the big message is, use your airline's apps to the American public. They're not going to cancel you last second. They're trying to do it as proactively as they can. This mandate really just came down in the last 24 hours. But it's going to hit some folks hard, and I think the airlines are doing everything they can and really successfully so far in managing that customer service aspect. But it's tough, and it's all because a bunch of folks down the street here, not too far from us, keep saying no to a continuing
That's exactly
resolution.
why you didn't want to serve in the Senate, as I remember, was this kind of stuff. But I flew back and forth to New York this week. It took me hours to get up and hours to get back. But I actually felt safe in the process. And I will say, I really went out of my way to thank TSA workers for showing up. I can't thank air traffic controllers because they don't let me in the tower.
You can right now.
But thank you. Because, these are actually all patriots who are showing up to keep the country running. And that's really important. But you're also a politician. Well, you were anyway. And I'm wondering how you see this moment in time, because it might well be the air traffic control system that forces an end to this shutdown. Do you think in the next couple of weeks everybody gets to the table here? Because you just painted a pretty ugly picture.
Yeah, they absolutely have to, because the pressure on the aviation system and the national airspace as we hit Thanksgiving is going to be absolutely immense. And I don't like using the word disaster. But I think the Secretary's right. If it doesn't end probably in the next week or the next 10 days, there is a chance they have to ramp up beyond 10%.
What would Thanksgiving look like? Disaster is the word J.D. Vance used.
Complete gridlock. Complete gridlock. Because the demand on the system is well beyond, it'll hit about 3 million passengers a day. That forced cancellation and unintended delays will hit really just historic proportions at that point. So this is already completely unprecedented.
Totally.
They didn't want to do it. There's a lot. I know there were some folks saying, well, where's the data? There's plenty of data. Just look at the number of call-outs we have. Look at the slowdowns we have. We had a situation in Burbank a month ago where they literally had nobody in the tower left. Right? Now, thank God they got creative, and San Diego stepped up and was helping land those planes. We had the same thing in Nashville, and Memphis stepped up and was helping land those planes.
Lord.
So everyone is pitching in, as you said. God bless these workers. Every time you walk through a TSA line, please say thank you to these folks. Absolutely. They have not been paid in over 30 days. You know what? The average TSA worker, they're getting $35,000, $40,000 a year, maybe.
I don't think
these
most
are not
people know
very
that.
well-paid individuals, but they keep coming to work. They keep doing the forced overtime because they know how important their job is to the national airspace, and they're just at the tip of the spear of the victims on this one.
Well, one of the vulnerabilities of the air traffic system is that it doesn't actually take that many people calling out for us to see disruptions. This has long been an issue. We've spoken about it many times on this program. We like to talk about long-term economic impacts, long-term impacts to the workforce. Is there any concern among the airlines that the shutdown is going to have damaging impacts even once the government reopens? Is it going to be hard to get air traffic controllers back into work?
So a couple things. If you looked at the number of individuals who have already retired in the past month, air traffic controllers, every day. It could be every day. It could be another dozen every single day this thing goes on, because they're saying, look, they don't want to be part of this frustration anymore in the system. Maybe they're taking their retirement, whatever it is. Now, God bless them. There's about 10, 11,000 of them out there. We probably need 13,000 in the system. Then you look at the number of people that are looking to come in, right? Maybe they were scheduled to come in to be part of the training programs for air traffic control. We've seen those numbers decrease quite a bit. The government workers that need to certify all that, those are government workers. Well, they're all furloughed right now, right? So now they can't do their job to get the back end of the pipeline to get people into those towers as fast. So that's really kind of jammed up. So every day that this goes on, you're disincentivizing people from entering the workforce, and it's a great job. They're wonderful jobs. We have great schools. This administration's put money with new technology all over the country for this. So the adverse effects, other than we have delays and a few cancellations, to your point, on the long term, could be absolutely huge. And on the economic side, if I may, you're already seeing pullback from people booking flights. Airlines tend to be a lead economic indicator as you go into holidays. That's where people spend dollars first, and as those dollars get pulled back, they then get pulled back in your regular spends, both regionally and nationally. So when I talk about the overall economic impact being somewhere in the $250 million to $500 million a day, that's going to have repercussions for months, all the way through the holiday season, undoubtedly. So, and the system just doesn't come back on like a light switch.
Well, that's what I want to ask you. By the way, you can't get a seat on Amtrak right now, but how long does it take? We all know what residual delays are like, right? Maybe there's a big impact on the air traffic control system for like 3 hours, and it takes the next day for everyone around the country to get back on time.
If they come, maybe they've gone on vacation. Maybe they're taking some time with family. Who knows? So it isn't just a light switch. You'll actually need to see that data and make sure folks come in. And it's anticipated. Usually it takes a day or two. Sure. But there is a little bit of a lag there. And then how close is that lag to that holiday weekend, and how much have people actually pulled back? And right now, because the airlines have so much flexibility for the customer, people aren't canceling just yet, nor should they. Nobody should cancel. The two big messages are: don't cancel your trip, because you can wait right up until the end, really, before you cancel, if you had to do that. Secondly, it's safe. The safety is not the concern, because that's why we're canceling flights. That's why we're slowing things down, to ensure that safety. So anyone who is traveling feel 100% safe and secure about the flights that they are taking. Think of it this way: no pilot would ever get in an airplane, and take off if they thought it wasn't safe, right? That would be crazy. So no, the system itself is safe. It is just in a bit of this inadvertent logjam. So it's frustrating, but you go back to your original question. I love the challenge. I've managed everything from a COVID pandemic to now, this is child's play.
Well, that's why you're here, I guess, as a problem solver. Tyler, I wouldn't want to have to put this jigsaw puzzle together, though, with all these routes.
I mean, definitely not. But to continue on your politics expertise, you mentioned these airlines are talking on Capitol Hill. We know that CEOs were at the White House. Can you give us any insight into what the talks are actually looking like when it comes to President Trump's involvement? We know to resolve the last shutdown, it really was pressure at the airports. Have you gotten any indication that this is going to be perhaps the thing that tips this over the edge to reopen the government when it comes to President Trump's view of the situation?
Interesting. So a couple aspects. Number one, we are definitely hearing, at least on Capitol Hill, that things are moving. There are discussions happening. The last I heard, and don't quote me on this, don't make it public or anything, but I believe the Senate is going to be here through the weekend working. So that's a good sign, right? So that's a good sign. They wouldn't be spending their time here if they didn't think they were making some real headway. They know what this new mandate out of FAA really means. Secondly, of course, whether you're President Trump or Schumer or Thune or the FAA or everybody should be putting kind of pressure on the system, not on one side or the other, but whatever that next bill is, vote for that one. That next bill, I don't care what party you're from, vote for that one and get this thing opened back up.
A message direct to the lawmakers. Sununu, Airlines for America President, CEO, of course, the former New Hampshire governor. Thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg. We're going to have much more at 5 p.m. Eastern. Come back and join us in the late edition of Balanced Power. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.